Well, I don't think I'll get into lead too much, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about energy and how that links into sustainability and what the energy issues are, what the energy picture for the next 10, 20, 30 years looks like, and what can we do about the energy situation and how that harkens back to issues of water. And I'll show you a little bit of work we did around the Fort Bragg region looking at regional sustainability issues and how it ties the two together too. So what I'd like to do is just kind of run through sort of a background on what is the world energy situation and how does it work, what's going on, and can we solve this thing? Is there a tech fix out there that's going to save us from freezing in the dark type of thing? Or we may be sweltering in the dark. I'm not quite sure which one it's going to be. And so can we get there? Is it realistic? Can we implement policies and things that take us to a more sustainable footing in a large area when we look at, say, an 8-county region? Can we really do it? And then a little bit about this energy-water nexus I talked about, because many of the solutions that are being proposed by the powers that be involve some pretty heavy water issues associated with them. Talk about shale oil and tar sands and coal to liquids technologies and things like that. So, looking at the world energy use, this is a projection, a past, and then the projection from the U.S. Department of Energy on the future of world energy consumption. So you got nuclear, renewables, natural gas, coal, liquids being petroleum, and they project it out. The interesting thing about all of these curves show out to 2030, they still continue to climb rather rapidly. These all add up to about 400 quads of energy, a quad being a quadrillion BTUs. That's BTU with 15 zeros. The U.S. uses about a quarter of that. But you can see the projections that the future is not only the past, but the past on steroids. And can we really accomplish that? Is that a realistic thing? And when we look at the United States projections out of the same folks, what do we see? The future, here again, is simply the past and more of the same. And I hope to show you today that this is virtually impossible. This is insanity. This is probably impossible. And we need to look at down in here for where our future comes from. But the U.S. uses 100 quads of energy, which is 1/4 of the world's energy. And we pretty much dice that out. We use about 1/4 of the world's oil, too. And the other thing is when we look at where our energy goes, a significant amount of our energy goes into the electric grid in this country. And we're looking at significant growth in the future of our electrical consumption. And if you'd have looked at this curve a year ago, you'd have seen coal be flat and natural gas be swooping way up. Well, we went out there based on some philosophy, I'm not quite sure what it was, built 280 gigawatts of electrical generation power for this nation that runs on natural gas. Guess what? There's no natural gas to put in them today, or natural gas on an economic basis, because natural gas prices quadrupled when they built these plants, and now we can't afford to run them. So now we've got to think about where we're going to get our electricity from. Well, guess what? There's 150 coal-fired power plants on the books. And if anybody's familiar with climate change and the issues associated with coal-fired power plants, we're just jumping off the cliff in another direction. But when we look at this issue and how are we doing in this curve, well, this curve here says that we were going to increase from 1980 to 2030 by 2.5 times our electrical consumption. And if you looked at that curve, about the halfway point where we were in 2006 was a little over 4 billion kilowatt hours. Well, that's 2 years ahead of the schedule on this curve. So this problem is getting worse, not better, as we look to the future. So we're going to give up on natural gas for the grid. We're going to tweak a little bit of nuclear here and there. We're going to have a slow growth of renewables, and we're going to kind of be deadlined on petroleum. That's can't work that way because it's not sustainable in the future. Now, this is the world oil picture. This is a picture that assumes we're going to have a peak oil, and the peak oil is going to be around 2010 at about 89 million barrels per day production. Now, this is a little heretical when you look at this picture. Is this true? Is this real? Well, I've been watching oil now for 20 years and looking at it grow and going through the peaks and coming on up. And the issue is, these are the last 5 years of production, counting 7 months of this year. 2003, 79.6. 2004, 83. 2005, 84.6. 2006, 84.6. 2007, 84.3. That's 7 months of this year. We have already peaked in oil production. Now, whether this is real or not, we'll have to see in the long run, because if you remember, we had another peak back here in 1973 or so, as we all sat in gasoline lines and waited to buy gasoline. And how this was able to go down was we took the liquid petroleum out of the energy grid, out of the electrical grid. That's how we managed to do this. Well, we've already wrung the oil out of the electric grid. Where are we going to wring it out of next? Well, that's going to be a more intransigent problem. So my feeling is that we probably could already be seeing the peak, or what we call the undulating plateau of production. Some people are now into the undulating plateau. But this is going back to 2003, and this is crude oil production. And if you look very carefully at this thing, you'll see it peaked right there. It was in 2005 is where the actual production of crude oil. And then this is the total, we call the total supply. The total supply is your crude oil plus your natural gas plant liquids plus what we call refinery gains. So you pump all this through the refinery, you end up with more than you started with. So we have some refinery gains, which add to the production of about 10 to 15 million barrels per day of that. But so this curve varies a little bit, and some of it's due to our natural gas production. But the picture is not rosy. And that picture is leading to what we're seeing recently. This is as of about a week ago, where we almost touched $100 a barrel for oil. As you can see, we went along for many years at $20, kind of bumped up to around $30, kind of slid up to maybe $40 for a little plateau, $50, $60, $70, rocked back down a little bit, and now we've steadily gone back up. I'm thinking the new settlement price is somewhere around $90, which represents a significant change from just a few short years ago. A decade ago, we're now talking about a factor 4, factor 4.5, or 5 for oil costs. And that's going to have significant impacts on our economy as we go down the line. It's going to be very inflationary, is what we're going to see, if we don't learn how to get off oil. Now, that's kind of the oil picture, and that's really because demand is still going up as those curves I showed you earlier, but production is not there. And so we're running into a situation where demand exceeds supply, the old PQ curve. What happens? The price goes up, and that's right where we are. This is natural gas production. This is an interesting curve. What this shows is that each year, each color is a year, and we go out and we find natural gas and we bring it into production. And then we produce from those wells, and this is the production from those wells that we bring in. Now, the thing you want to notice about this curve is what is happening. It's getting steeper as we go through time. That curve getting steeper means that the new wells that we drill deplete faster than the old wells that we drill. So what do? We have to drill more wells. So we're punching about 2,400 wells a year now, trying to find natural gas to keep up with our requirements in the U.S., and that's just to keep it even, never mind increased production. So there's something we call a decline rate, which the decline rate tells you how much your existing production declines in a given year. Now, if you look back here in the 90s, it was 19, 20, 21%, slowly going up through the 20s. To 2006, we estimated the decline rate is 32%. That means to produce the same amount of natural gas in 2007 as we did in 2006, we have to replace 32% of our production. We've got to go out, drill new wells, find the gas, drill the wells, bring it into production and bring it online and put that into the grid. Just to stay even, 32%. So you can see we're kind of fighting a losing battle. It's taking more and more and more every year. So we're moving farther and farther a range to find this. We're out in the Gulf of Mexico, deep water natural gas. We're drilling down 6 miles through a mile of water, then a mile down through the salt dome to find natural gas. And then to bring that into production is significantly more expensive than we used to have when we punched a hole on the ground. So this is your natural gas price curve, and this is for the state of Illinois. And you can see for many, many years, we were around $1 a million BTUs. And we slowly slid up to around $5 and stayed there quite a long time. And now we're starting to bump our way up to, this shows $11 on the average, but I got my gas bill a few weeks ago, and it was $13.50 a million BTUs on my latest gas bill. And that was for residential consumption. Commercial's a little less, industrial's a little less. What's bothering the commercial industrial sector is they're getting hit with these price speaks, and the price is kind of leveling out. They're not getting any big break for being a big buyer or a big consumer. They're paying almost retail prices for these things now. So that's hurting the economy of the state also. And that pressure is coming nationwide for oil. So we talked about oil, natural gas. Now what's the situation with coal? This is a worldwide projection for coal production by the World Energy Organization. Looking at the scenario and looking at production in the past, as we get up in here, they're projecting production. So this is North America here, U.S., Canada, Mexico. Most of this is production in the United States, broken up by the subbituminous and the bituminous coal. The thing to notice at this is there's a peak of production, and this peak of production is right around 2025. But every time you hear Exxon or Mobil or somebody like that talk, they say we've got enough coal for 200 years. Well, I suppose this thing could go out 200 years, but depending on how fast you take it, it's certainly going to affect how long it lasts. The other thing we found out recently is the viability of a lot of this coal is not what we thought it was. So true, realistic, recoverable supplies are maybe half of what we thought they were in the coal area. So we're looking at as a peak not too far away. I may even live to see that one. And worldwide, the peak is right here, somewhere around 2020, somewhere in there. So even coal is not going to be our major savior. I often wonder if they would take these curves and put them in their climate models, what it would show versus the assumption from the other curves that we keep producing these fuels forever and a day upward. But coal is even experiencing a price increase. As you can see, we had a little bump in the 70s, come along, and now we're getting this little taper up too. Because you look at the substitutability of fuels, as natural gas and oil go up, the price of coal is going to go up. And that's going to cost us a bit throughout the economy. Remember, half of our electricity is generated by coal. This is the consumption pattern of the United States in 2006. This is the inputs to our energy flows. As you can see, coal, and we use right around 100 quads of energy, so you can look at these numbers and almost call them percents. So coal is about 24%, natural gas about 19%, crude oil about 11%. This is domestic production. Natural gas, plant and liquids, 2.35. Nuclear power, about 8%. Renewables, which is high head hydro, low head hydro, and wood burning is about 6.7%. And burning of biomass is about 50-50 between that thing. It's about 4 and 4. It used to be about 4 and 4 for here. Now, these are the imports. So 34% of our energy is imported now. About 5% of it is natural gas, and 30% of it, or 29%, is oil, which when you look at those separate sectors, about 69% of our oil is now imported and about 22% of our natural gas. Much of that natural gas comes from Canada. And I'll talk about Canada in a little bit when we start talking about tar sands. But Canada is devoting more and more of their natural gas resources to producing oil from tar sands, which means that oil is not going to be available to export to the U.S. I mean, that natural gas won't be available to export to the U.S. So we're going to have to search farther and wider for that natural gas substitution. So the total supply is about 104. There's a little bit of export, a little bit of thing fudging around, and you can see. So, but when you look at fossil fuels, 85% of our energy in this nation comes from coal, oil, or natural gas. Our consumption was right around 100, 21% into residential buildings, 18% into commercial buildings, 32% into the industrial sector, which includes the electric power generation, and about 29% into transportation sector. The sectors, and for the last 3 years, this has stayed right around 100. It really didn't change much. But it's shifting a bit in here. The building sectors are growing a bit, and the transportation sector is growing a bit, and then the industrial is shrinking a bit, is the way that sort of works out a year. But what about these other sources? When we look at on a global scale, we look at annual global growth of the various energy sources. And this is from 2000 to 2005. Photovoltaic electricity grew at 29% worldwide. Wind, 26% worldwide. Biofuels, 17% worldwide. Coal, 4.4. Natural gas, 2.5. Oil, 1.6. Nuclear, 1.1. So that's, you're seeing the growth now is in the renewables, not so much in the conventional fossils. When we look at the United States, we have some slightly different figures here. Our PV grew 33%. Our wind grew 27%. Our biofuels grew 23%, all higher than the world grew as a whole. And then our coal grew 2.5, net gas 2.3, oil grew at 1. First time it's grown in many, many years, since 1970. And electricity grew, nuclear electric grew at about 1%. So our conventionals are actually growing less than the worldwide growth, and our renewables are growing faster. So that said that there is a slight transition going on. But when you're down at 7% or so, it's going to take a long time to reach a dominant piece of those market sectors. So the result is worldwide, we look at what we call the Keeling curve from Mauna Loa record, and we can see it is continuing every year. This is 1960 through 2006, looking at the atmospheric carbon dioxide, steady growth, and actually, if you look at it very carefully, you may even see it that it's accelerating a bit. So we're producing more carbon, and we're absorbing less of it as time goes on. And this leaves us this little spike right here. If we look at the past 400,000 years, and these are the carbon levels, we go up and down, up and down. These are periods of warm periods. The rest of these are periods when the Earth is glaciated. So we got the Wisconsin and Illinois and the Kansas and all those glaciers going back. But we're coming down, and we look, and we're heading back up. And this is the current period that we're in, the warm period. And normally it would kind of set back and go back and come on down. Everything being equal, you would think there'd be ice sheets over eastern Canada right now. And there probably should be, because that's where the Earth wants to go. But we've spiked carbon dioxide, and we've been doing carbon dioxide altering climate for 9,000 years, somewhere in that range. As soon as we had settled places and agriculture came along, we started to deforest the Earth and change the picture. And of course, then with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we really took off. And you can see the stages here. And so that's where we are. Now this peak is now up to 380. So it goes all the way to the top. So significant change. So I guess we're forestalling an ice age, which is maybe not a bad thing. We can take it in. But so when we look at our sectors and our carbon emissions and see where they're coming from, this is industry, this is transportation, and this is buildings. So our buildings are really our biggest culprit when it comes to where's our carbon dioxide coming from. So your house is producing more carbon dioxide than your car is. We kind of think we always associate it with transportation. But you got to remember, the electricity we use in our houses is mostly fossil fuel fired, except for maybe 27% of it. So, and it's coal fired. 50% of it's coal fired, and that makes a significant impact. So about 80% of the carbon emissions from a building comes from the electricity it's buying at the coal-fired power plant. So we look at that issue, and so one place to focus then is who's the biggest actor, what's the easiest target to get to. We'll talk about all of these, but how much energy does our building use? And this is looking back about 100 years at building energy consumption, and this is in how many BTUs per square foot your building uses. So back in 1920, we used about 80,000 BTUs per square foot. And we kind of seesawed around a bit and slowly worked our way up through the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s and built some of our worst buildings. And then we're starting to go back down a little bit. We're trimming back down. But this is the entire building sector. Now, commercial buildings use maybe 20 or so more than these, and residential buildings use maybe 20 or so less. So a good residential building today I've seen as low as 5,000. So 79 to 5. A good commercial building as low as 20 to 30 here. Schools, 30,000 BTU per square foot. It can be done with today's technology in a cost-effective manner. But so where's the future taking us? Well, the Department of Energy thinks we're going to do nothing in the next future. They project they say, and this is just the commercial building sector. We're at 110 now. We're going to go to 109, then to 111, 111, 111, 111. They think nothing's going to happen in the future about energy consumption in buildings. I have to really wonder what they're smoking in the Department of Energy most of the time. I find none of their projections come out valid. They never predict a price problem or a spike or an oil problem or a natural gas problem. They all kind of fall upon us, and then we and Monday morning quarterbacks say, "Oh yeah, we saw that coming, but we don't want to tell you about it." So per year, yeah, per year, yeah, per annual consumptions. Yeah. So what are we going to do about that? Well, there's a tremendous opportunity for change in that one major sector. When we look at what's out there, we tear down 1.7 billion square feet of buildings and renovate 5 billion square feet and build new 5 billion square feet a year. So for every house we build, every 6 houses we build, we tear down 1. Every 4 commercial buildings we build, we tear down 1. Now, if we were replacing them with highly efficient buildings, we could slowly gain on this problem, we would think, and over time actually accelerate that curve. So in the next 30 years, we're talking about 50 billion square feet will be torn down, 150 billion square feet will be renovated, and 150 billion square feet will be built new, if we only could do that right. How many went to see William McDonough when he was here? Okay, what did he say? He said, we got the design wrong. That's our problem. Well, we have an opportunity to change the design and fix what we build. Okay, so but by 2030, 3/4 of the built environment will either be new or renovated. Tremendous opportunity there. So what are we going to do about it as the professional sector of the building sector? Well, we're looking at a goal now for AIA 2030 we talk about is a goal of by 2010 we will reduce the fossil fuel consumption in buildings 50% for new and renovated buildings. We're talking 2 years from now, that's our goal to hit. All right? And then reduce consumption 10% or more in each of the next following 5 years. So if you go 5 years out, we're going to 40%, then 30% on down every 5 years. Till we get about 2025, we're talking zero net energy commercial buildings. That's our goal. And how does that look? Well, they use what we call an Energy Star Target Finder, which is a way of figuring out how much energy my building uses today, and I can benchmark my building and see what it's going to use. And I benchmarked some buildings in Chicago. They're right around 100,000 BTU per square foot, depending on size, which is a pretty weak standard. That's the goal, is to beat that. And ASHRAE standard 1999, which till last month was the law of this state, They use about 67 kBTUs per square foot. And if we target 30% below that, we get the 47, which is a little less than half of one of these. So we can build an AI 2010 building today. The average green building or LEED building is 30% below code. And nowadays they're below the 2004 code, which is about 5 to 6% below this code. Okay. Now, October 9th, ASHRAE 2004 became the law of this state. So that's our target goal, is to go beyond codes in that range. So it can be done. It can be done with today's technology, and it can be done cost effectively. Return on investment is certainly there. The American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers is looking at the AIA goals. The architects got these goals, but somebody has to tell them how to get there. So ASHRAE is working on the how-to books. So they're coming out with a series of what we call energy design guides, looking at 30, 50, 75, and then net zero energy buildings as a progression. And we're doing small buildings, we're doing offices, retail, schools, warehouses, highway lodging, high-rise residential, and existing buildings. And the idea is that we'll have the 30% guides by 2008, the 50% guides by 2011, the 70% guides by 2016, and the net zero guides by 2020. That allows the guides to be put in place, the people to start to design and construct to those guides before the code comes along and follows you and says that's going to be the law of the land. Now, the 2007 code is now out. It's 5 to 7% below the 2004 code. The 2010 code is going to be 30% below the 2007 code. So they're ratcheting down these codes. And these ASHRAE codes are written to be law and be adopted as law. So when the state adopts the International Energy Conservation Code, it calls out this code for commercial buildings. And that will be our standard. And that's where we're moving. The only thing is, some states haven't adopted these codes at all. So we're trying to make a movement to get states to adopt the building codes. But the idea is that you move in that direction. As a matter of fact, the state of California has come out and said, by 2020, commercial buildings will be net zero energy, and by 2030, residential buildings will be net zero energy. So they're taking it serious out there. It's part of their climate change plan. So this is all coming, and we're all going to see these things happen in that building sector. And why is it so important to reduce energy consumption in buildings? Well, first off, it's the easiest target out there. We can reduce our operating costs. We can save money. We can then stabilize that carbon in the atmosphere and reduce the impacts of climate change, improve the quality of life in our buildings. We find that these highly energy efficient buildings are actually more comfortable buildings. They're better built buildings. You're building to LEED criteria. They have better lighting. They have better comfort. They have better air ventilation associated with them. And they're just more controllable. They're just better places to be. And they're day lit and these other things. So we need some continuation. We had some energy policies that come in fairly strong after those oil embargoes. And if we used energy today the way we did in the mid-70s, we would use 40 quads more of energy. We're using 100 today. We'd be using 140 if we hadn't changed what we were doing. Now we just got to stay on that glide path and keep going down. And that's 2 billion tons of CO2 per year avoided by that alone. And so we want to take it another 40% or so. Okay. And hey, it's a no-brainer. We talk about the cost of saving energy is going down while the price of energy is going up. So it's very cost-effective to start looking into this thing. And efficiency is what? It's the cleanest, safest, most reliable, and most secure source of energy we have. It's a win-win-win-win-win. It's wins in all the way around. And we haven't come close to tapping the potential. It's certainly out there. Incentives under EPAC 2005 are there. They're very weak incentives. It's part of the problem. They're going to give you $1.80 per square foot for building a building that uses half the energy. Well, $1.80 per square foot is not going to pay the freight on the extra cost to doing that. That needs to be quadrupled at least, and giving you tax credits instead of tax deductions. But it's coming slowly. There's a new H.R. 6 in Congress where they're trying to at least double those incentives for buildings, because that's the weak area. But what is the potential? Well, our operation, the CDAC, over at the BRC, we're funded by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunities to help commercial buildings become more efficient. And this is what we've seen. We've looked at about 200 buildings, and we've seen a potential as high as 80 and as low as 3% for existing buildings, and as high as 86 and 12% for new designs, depending on the scope and what we can attack. But taking a new design and reducing it to 86%, can you imagine how bad that design was? You know, we haven't got the designs right. But on average, we're looking at existing buildings, 32% energy savings, 34% energy cost savings. 39 new buildings we looked at, designs, 41% energy savings and 38% cost savings. So we do better with a new building because there's more opportunity and there's more things you can do. Typically what we see in an existing building, we can't do much with the windows because they have a very long payback. But a new building, you've got a small differential to put very good windows in it. So you can have more bang for your buck in a new building. But economics, how did the economics of that thing roll out? We're going to save 40% of this new building. Well, we estimate it takes a client about $68 to save 1 million BTUs of energy. And it's heavily weighted towards the retrofit end of the scale. We figure our program to go out and analyze the building, do the energy audit, model it up, is about $16 per million BTUs. And the building is buying BTUs at around $11 for gas, $27 for electricity, and it's weighted about 1/3 electricity and 2/3 natural gas is what we're finding in these buildings. And so that's a weighted cost of about $17. So if that's 17 divided into the 68, what it costs them to fix it is a 4-year payback. The unfortunate thing is we're seeing many businesses and industries saying, I want a 2-year payback. I want a 1.5 year payback. And we say, hey, this is 28% on your money. What's wrong with that? And they want more. So what we're seeing is they're implementing about half of what we recommend, somewhere in that range. They're picking the gravy, you know, they're cherry picking the stuff with the fast payback, which is a little bit too bad, which tells us the incentives are not strong enough out there. Now, there are incentives coming in the state of Illinois. The governor signed this thing called, we call it EAPS, the Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard. That's going to require the two big utilities, Ameren and ComEd, to start what we used to call demand-side management programs. They will start buying down light bulbs and equipment and stuff in your buildings. So they're going to have money out there. If you're going to put in a new chiller, they'll pay 20% of the cost or something like this. They're going to buy down these types of projects in the state. That program starts next June. It was just, they submitted their programs to the ICC November 15th, and then the ICC has till February 15th to come back and say whether they accept their programs. And the programs are a bunch of buy downs and some whole building things and a mix of different things. And some of the sectors and Department of Commerce Economic Activity has 25% of the action to do, and it's going to come, some of it on us. So we're going to expand from doing commercial buildings to doing schools and municipal buildings and eventually university buildings and some other things for our program. And then we will steer those buildings to the utility to get the funding to do the changes. So, and that program starting at $50 million next year, $100 million a year after that, $150 after that, $200 after that, $250 after that. It's going up $50 million a year, up to right around $2 billion, I think. It'll be on your bill, by the way. You're going to notice a 30-cent fee on your electric bill. Yeah, that's going to fund that. So the incentives have to be there, or you're not going to get anywhere. What I'd like to do now is show you results of another research project I've been working on, where we looked and say, well, we've got all these things we can do. How do you work it into a city or into a community, into a wide area? And we're doing something we call the Strategic Sustainability Program for the U.S. Army, where we're looking 35 years out. We're modeling urban growth 35 years out. We're looking at the implications of that growth 35 years out. And then we're saying, this is the current path. Is that the path we want to be on? And how do we get off that path? What can we do? So we did Fort Bragg and 8 counties around it. We did dynamic urban growth, as I said, for 35 years, and we developed energy and water projections associated with that growth. We did other things. We did runoff. We did all kinds of things. But I just want to talk about energy and water and air emissions. Okay? And we analyzed the potential for interventions. This is the model we use. You look at a whole bunch of different factors. We break it down to cellular automata. We break it down to 30 by 30 meter cells and project whether that cell is going to change to a residential, to commercial, to different use of the cell, and then we project that out. So we use the land use evolution impact assessment model over at Urban Planning's what we call the LEAM lab. So this is a model of the Fort Bragg area. And if you can see carefully, you can see it growing. The yellow dots are residential development. The red dots are commercial development. So you can see over the next 30 years, it's growing houses, it's growing neighborhoods, it's growing. And then we can look at all of those cells, look at the population, look at the land use change, and then make some deductions about how much more driving is going to be there, how many more houses are going to be built, how many more square foot of commercial buildings are going in, and then we can look at the associated impacts. So we modeled, and the southeast is growing very fast. 500,000 population growth, 200,000 new households, 260 million of commercial industrial square footage, lost 19,000 acres of ag land and 34,000 acres of forest land. So we're also looking at the habitat implications of this too, and the watershed implications of this too, but I won't go over that here. So the idea is that you got a current state and you're going to the future, and this is where you're going to end up, but this is really where you'd like to be in what we say a more sustainable footage. So can we intervene in spots and get this thing to go the direction we want to go? So very quickly, we won't go over this. This is an energy model. It looks at commercial buildings. It looks at residential buildings. It looks at agricultural sector. It looks at transportation sector. It looks at the utility sector, and models those as things change. And what you end up with is the linear growth. This is for 8 counties around Fort Bragg, plus the fort itself. And you can see that this is electrical growth. This is natural gas. The yellow is fuel oil, gasoline, kerosene, LPG, wood, and other being diesel fuel. So we modeled that out and said, oh, okay, so we're going to see some growth here, 41% increase in energy over the next 35 years. So what can we do about that? So we looked at a bunch of initiatives, and I talked about those things for buildings, looking at the new codes coming in, looking at advanced design guides and core performance, which is another guide to build energy efficient buildings. And so we looked at programs. So at 2010, we'd adopt ASHRAE 2010. So new buildings will use 30% less than the ones that we built the year before. 2015, 50%. 2020, 75. On down to 2025, we said we're going to start sticking in net zero commercial buildings. Existing buildings, we put a target in at 2015, a program to reduce 20% and 25% and 40% in 2025. And we did this. We assumed a penetration and an over time process. So we looked at agriculture. We looked at energy efficiency in agriculture. We have some reports that tell us that 35% is a good typical potential savings in agricultural sector. And renewable energy from state of Georgia's climate plan, 25% of the agriculture looked like they could do some renewables on farming. Same thing with transportation. We looked at greenhouse standards for cars. We looked at biofuels, and we looked at hybrid electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and looked at a penetration in the future. Said, well, if we do all these things in each out years and we reach the penetration levels we want, what's it going to look like? Well, we grew for a while till we started to get our penetration coming in, and then we were able to turn that energy growth curve around. We thought that's pretty interesting. How would we? So it's doable. You can change the way a set of counties and a city works by just improvements that have to come in through codes and other vehicles to make it work. Now, we haven't done the cost analysis of this yet, okay? But most of this is cost effective. Almost all of it has a return on investment. It may not be that 1-year payback that everybody wants, but it'll certainly be in the range of 4 to 5 year paybacks, which I think is pretty good. I'd like 20% on my money, I don't know, instead of the 1 or 2 I get nowadays. But so that's the way that picture looked. And so when you just lay the two graphs on top of one another, you can see, the avoided area was almost 400 trillion BTUs of savings, which is a little over a third of a quad of energy for that area. And that could power Fort Bragg for 130 years. Fort Bragg's the thing we're trying to keep alive and have it have energy and water in the long run. Okay, so then we built an air emissions model. So we're using these sectors. You've got the agricultural sector, you've got airshed cleaning, you've got carbon sequestration, you've got agriculture, you've got the built environment and the sources from there, you've got the traffic and all of those things are energy use. So what's it look like? Well, this is, and I just plotted carbon dioxide here to show you the growth in carbon dioxide. But it's very similar to the growth in energy consumption, except there's some issues of agriculture here and a few other things embodied in the model. But 48% increase in carbon emissions. And these are all the gases. We looked at SOx and NOx and CO and CO2, particulates and mercury, and projected them out 35 years what they would be. And so we get this kind of curve where we looked at the interventions and projected. So we avoided 35 million tons of carbon dioxide just by being more energy efficient and looking at some of the agricultural aspects of it. So that can turn that curve around just like we can turn the energy curve around. Then we looked at water. Same thing, same sectors. You're looking at commercial buildings, residential buildings, infrastructure losses. It's a typical public water supply loses 10% in a year. We looked at the waters going, and we looked at difference between groundwater and surface water consumptions, and looked at conservation, ag lands, and ran the model. And this is the water projection for the future. And we started at about 50,000 million gallons per year, and our baseline use was from the USGS baseline use for those counties. We started from where they are now and grew from there. And we said, well, what if we do some things here? What if we institute a big program at Fort Bragg? They were going to drop their water consumption 70%. How do they get 50% of it? They turned off the irrigation systems on the lawns. Okay? That's what everybody needs to do. But we looked at public systems having a water loss program. It can be very effective. And some systems lose up to 40 or 50% of their water through water losses. An industrial water conservation program starting in 2012. A residential water conservation program starting in 2015, which is simply taking all the old houses and retrofitting them with the new toilets and the new faucet aerators and that type of thing, with an incentive from the utility company, and making sure the new houses at a certain date used ultraflow fixtures instead of 1.6 gallon, move them down to a 1.28 gallon, use double flush and all these kinds of things. Requirement for new homes. And then we had an ag program for the farmers, looking at a 50% reduction in irrigation. So we ran the water. And it didn't do the same thing as energy, which was interesting. So we hit it, we got going. Whoops, the curve turned around again. And we said, well, what the heck is this, And we looked at it, and we said, wow, we were great successful on the energy. We avoided 327,000 million gallons in that process, but we didn't make it. And what was the deal? And we feel there was 3 things we didn't do. And that was water recycling, gray water recovery for flushing of toilets and things like that, and rainwater harvesting. Those have to be part of a water program if you're actually going to go to a sustainable mode where you don't grow anymore. You have to keep it flat or declining. So that's kind of the picture on the population of those counties. We said it can be done, but you need bigger, broader programs. And we are now in the process of addressing those counties. as part of this research project, going down there and having stakeholder meetings and getting people involved and seeing if we could actually carry this out for real in those counties down there. It has to be done in a timely manner. It's important. Trick is getting all those vested interests to engage and actually start to change policy. And then you need significant incentives to get people to adopt. Now, we've looked at some water companies that have done the same things I've talked about, and they had toilet exchange programs. The penetration was 5%. And they would buy you your new toilet and everything else. So you got to find ways to get people to make the change. And that change is going to come. Now, some of it's going to come through higher water prices. So, everybody realizes that pretty quick we're going to get a shaku here in Champaign-Urbana when they want to raise our water prices 60% to build the new plant that probably could have been avoided if they'd have done an integrated water management plan instead and bought us all new toilets. So we're still not doing a lot of integrated resource planning with water. We're forcing it into the electrical grid. We need to force it into the water grid. But what I saw was that the water, I think, was a more intractable than energy, and your efforts have to be even broader to get things accomplished, to move us towards that sustainable posture. Now I'd like to talk just a little bit about water, and most of you are probably familiar with this. About 97% of our water is in the oceans, 3% is the other, and of that 3%, 99% of that is in the ice caps and glaciers and inland seas and in groundwater. The other 1% is in our rivers, our lakes, in our atmosphere, and our soil moisture. Okay? So we don't have a lot of accessible water that we can talk about when we look at all the water on the earth. But when we look at where our water goes in our economic sectors, we find that everybody thinks of buildings. We talk about buildings. Well, agriculture and thermoelectric power are the big water consumers in this nation. Agriculture and thermoelectric, about 40% each of the fresh water. Now, if you add in the thermoelectric plants that are cooled with salt water, it's another entire 15% of the U.S. water consumption comes in there. So they're at about 55% of the overall water consumption in the nation. About 12% goes into buildings, domestic water supply. So we can turn off that faucet when we brush our teeth all we want, but till we tackle these two units, we're not going to make a great deal of progress here. Yeah. But our energy security is closely linked with the state of our water resources. The water resources are required to achieve any sort of energy security in years and decades ahead. We need to be able to have water resources to get there. And our water resources cannot be guaranteed without careful attention to related energy issues. The two are inextricably linked. The water energy nexus. You get one, you get the other, and they go back and forth in there. So this is just sort of where the water goes in the U.S. You see the 43,000 million gallons per day into public supply. And you see irrigation at 137, thermoelectric at 136, and of course these two I consider agriculture too. But those are sort of where the water goes. But how much water in a kilowatt hour of electricity? 27 gallons on average. Okay? If it's a nuclear power plant, which we have a lot of in Illinois, it's more, because they eject more of their heat into the water. You've got a coal-fired power plant, it sends 20% of its heat up the stack. Nuclear power plant, that 20% goes into the water, so it needs about 20% more water. So a 500 megawatt coal-fired power plant requires about 12 million gallons per hour of water for cooling and other process requirements, such as scrubbing SOx and other stack gases. So we want to build 159 of these in the U.S. So that's going to be a lot of water consumption, 12 million gallons per hour. But our security rests on these two principles. We have to use less energy to provide our needed services, and we have to access technology that provide diverse supply of renewable, affordable, and reliable, and economically sound energy. At the same time, we've got to have a good water supply. So Thermoelectric power plants are not going to get us there. We can't build this fleet of nuclear power plants we're talking about and this fleet of coal-fired power plants to make sustainable progress.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Are those numbers water withdrawn or water consumed?
Much of it is what we call non-consumed water. I mean, it goes through the cycle. So it's like at the ethanol plant. Everybody's up in arms about the 1 million gallons. Well, that 1 million gallons goes through the plant and down in the stream. And
I think those numbers you have is withdrawn, not consumption. Those are
yeah, the consumption. Some of it evaporates as consumptive use.
You're saying consumption, but I don't think those numbers are consumption. Those
No,
are
they're cooling.
withdrawal.
They're because some plants have a closed loop. They'll run the closed loop. It'll have so much water it consumes, and the rest stays in the loop and goes around. And most of the new plants have closed loops. It used to be 50 gallons. With the closed loops, it's down to 27.
No, with closed loop means using cooling tower is about 1 gallon.
Yeah.
It's about 1 or 2. If you have open loop, means withdrawing water from river
Yeah.
and dumping back
Yeah.
to the river, then
Yeah.
it's about between 20 and 50 gallons.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is the average between them all. So, what do we got to think about? We need to think about new electrical sources that don't use water. And what are those? Well, that's photovoltaics, that's wind turbine, that's low-head hydro, the water's, it's run-of-river generation. So we need to stick every Corps of Engineer dam out there needs a turbine on it. You go to Europe, every one of them's got one. Every lock and dam has a turbine on it. You go to U.S., no. So we're starting to develop those too. FERC is moving in that direction. Now, the other source is what we call this coal gasification combined cycle plant. You gasify the coal, you make a gas out of it, you can strip hydrogen off, you can run this thing. This FutureGen is one of these. You produce a pretty good stream of carbon dioxide, but if you can capture and sequester it, then you're doing pretty good. And the only water you need is for the combined cycle part. The gas turbine part doesn't need any cooling water. It's just the steam turbine. You're taking the exhaust gases from the steam turbine, boiling water, running a conventional Rankine cycle plant is a topping cycle. So there's some water there, but much less than, say, a conventional pulverized coal plant. So those are sort of your low water sources of electricity, and that's what we need to think about moving to. And then I mentioned peak oil and the issues of oil and the growth requirements for oil. So where are we going to get our oil supply from? So all the folks out at Chevron and where have you think this is where we're going to get it from. We're going to exploit the tar sands. And by the way, 2 years ago it was tar sands, now it's oil sands. Canada changed the name from tar sands to oil sands, and now they are the second largest resource of oil in the world next to Saudi Arabia, because they have oil sands. Same stuff in the ground, goop in the ground. And then oil shale in the U.S., we are the Saudi Arabia of the world for oil shale, and we feel we're the Saudi Arabia of the U.S. for coal, if we can do coal to liquids. Okay, and then biofuels, ethanol, biodiesel, these all have some issues associated with them. First thing is how efficient are they energy-wise?
You didn't have hydrogen up there.
No, I didn't.
Hydrogen, and I've always wondered for people who are pushing hydrogen as an alternate fuel, where's that hydrogen coming from, and how does that relate to water supply?
Well, the hydrogen can come as a byproduct from this one. This is what FutureGen is.
From water.
Well, it's actually coming from the hydrocarbons in the fuels, in the fossil fuels, mostly. Now, the other way is you're going to somehow get electrical source from a renewable source and then dissociate water. And there are people working on catalytics and things to make that process go easier and be more efficient. But that's about an 80% efficient process. Well, the water has to come from the same place all the other water comes from, and believe me, it has to be very pure water too. No, you're going to scale up everything. You can't dissolve solids in it and everything. So it has to be polished and treated and everything. But this is what we call the energy efficiency of the various sources. So I thought I'd show you conventional world oil. Okay. We have produced about 1 trillion
trillion barrels of oil. So if you notice, it started about 98% efficient. We're down to about 92% efficient in the production of world oil. Why? As we produce more and more oil, it gets thicker and thicker. It comes out of the pores more slowly, so we have to do what we call secondary recovery techniques. We pump water down there, and we try and flush it out from the reservoir and kind of center it in, and we can pump some more out. And then eventually we have to go to tertiary recovery, where we pump either carbon dioxide or steam down the hole. So those things take energy to do. And then you got to pump it up because it just doesn't flow out of the ground anymore. So there's more energy associated with recovering oil. Now, if you look at this curve, it goes down to about 3 trillion barrels of oil, which some people feel is probably the ultimate recovery available on the Earth. Even though there may be 10 to 14 trillion barrels out there, most of it is not recoverable. A typical oil well, you're recovering maybe 40%. A good one, 50%. The rest of it's left in the ground because you can't get it out of the pores. Okay. So the efficiency of our oil production is steadily going down. Now let's look at some other things. We got the oil sands. That's at right now about 84% efficient. And that's assuming that we go in and we scoop off the surface layer and we actually mine the tar sands, send it to a retort and cook it, and get the syncrude out of that and goes to a refinery. That process has taken about 4% of Canada's natural gas right now to do 1 million barrels a day. They want to upgrade to 4 million barrels a day. That's 16% of Canada's natural gas supply. That's the supply they export to us. So we can wipe that off. Okay. The coal to liquids. FT is a Fischer-Tropsch process. Coal to liquids. It's about 62%, somewhere in that range, of energy into the energy you get out of this process. And ethanol from corn, somewhere around, say, 52%, somewhere in that range, currently. Now, there's a lot of things, biotech, going on to hopefully increase the efficiency of corn production, both from growing specific corns that are bred for ethanol, looking at better bugs, for a better word, to process it, ferment it, and ways to reduce the water needed for the system. But that's about the way they stack up, energy-wise. Now, water. Oil shale is about 1 to 3 barrels per barrel of oil. So, and that's the newer, better process. In the 70s, it was probably more like 10 barrels per barrel of oil. Now, everybody know what oil shale is? It's really organic milestone. It's out there in Colorado and those places that have no water. And it's just, you dig it up, and it's a sort of a gray-colored rock. It contains kerogen, which is a product that never quite made the transition to oil. Okay, so what you can cook these rocks and get this kerogen out of it, and then process that into oil, make a synthetic crude out of it. Very energy intensive. But if you're looking at a production level of 2.5 million barrels a day, we're talking 105 to 350 million gallons per day of water needed in Montana, Colorado, places like that. So they're going to get this from the source waters of the Colorado River. Okay? Well, what's wrong with the Colorado River?
It's all you.
It doesn't even make the ocean. Okay? So, real problematical. And you're going to put this big production facility in, guess what? You've got all of these people you're going to hire in these crews and this development, and they're all going to come in, and they're going to use 58 million gallons a day in their homes and all that kind of stuff, where development wasn't going to be. Okay, so oil shale has some problems. Now, there's another process they're looking at, which is they're going to cook it in the ground. Instead of mine it and retort, they're going to cook it in the ground. Shell is coming up with this. And they actually heat the ground and cook it for a year or something, and then it comes out as a liquid. Now, where are they going to get the heat for the ground? 3 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plants. Okay? And how much water do they need? It's even worse than this. So it's going to be very interesting. Okay, tar sands. The guys up in Canada. 2 to 4 barrels of waste water currently through the process. And they have these huge lagoons now of black contaminated water up there that they don't know quite what to do with. But very quickly they're going to be despoiling the Athabasca River and the whole area up there. And then they're going to move to a new process. Once they've mined they mine it now, surface, but they're going to move to this kind of in situ processing where they, for the deeper veins of the tar sands, where they actually are going to put steam down in the ground, heat it, and bring the oil back up that way. Now, of course, steam requires heat and water, so there's going to be a similar water consumption associated with that. And then the cold to liquids process, the Fischer-Tropsch, is about 5 to 7 barrels of water to barrel of oil in that range. So whichever way you do these things, they consume significant amount of water for our alternatives. So I don't think our path is with traditional resources. The question is, what do we do? And we start looking at these alternate paths, and we find that they have some issues associated with them too. And so for me, it led me back to basically what are the non-water sources of energy that we can use in our building and in our sectors. And to me, it's photovoltaics, it's solar hot water, it's wind power, it's some of these other things that don't have such an environmental impact associated with them. And then some combination of these new technologies, maybe combined cycle gas turbines to kind of minimize the footprint of that coal plant and sequester the carbon and have clean coal. I know it's an oxymoron, but that's sort of clean coal. But the big thing is we've got to greatly increase the efficiency of energy and water in our current environment and our current agricultural system. We really got to reduce the demands, and then we can see how we can meet those demands in a sustainable manner. And then I think water's going to be the bigger problem than energy to solve. Energy we can lick. I'm a techie guy, so I think we can put the tech fixes in for energy. After all, what do we have? We use 400 quadrillion BTUs of energy a year. The sun provides 600 million quadrillion BTUs of energy a year to the Earth. So we got a lot of room for inefficiency in that process, I think. So even if our PV collectors are 17% efficient, the sunlight's pretty abundant. So. And then the non-water-based renewables must be our focus. That's what I feel. The only way to work that way is to get away from the water thing. Okay. That was what I had. Any questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
You didn't mention geothermal at all, and I've heard there's a lot of research in what that can add.
Yeah, geothermal is true, what I call true geothermal. Where you go out, you punk a hole in the ground, and you use hot water from the earth, or you send water down that gets heated and use it in a cycle. And they're considered renewable, but they're not really renewable because over the long run, you do deplete the heat source. But that is a viable thing, and certain areas of the country, it certainly is being pursued more and more. And there's some pretty big incentives.
Let it be the next guy's problem. And the second question is, are the new buildings being built locally that you're aware of, as apartments, etc., are they energy efficient or are they cheap construction?
As far as I can tell, they're cheap, ticky-tack construction, and they're minimum code. Yeah, the commercial life, they're going to write them off and junk them, but 4 years is what they look for. But the idea is to build the house right from the beginning, and through codes enforce that in. Now, right now, any home builder in this nation can get a $2,000 tax credit for any house that he builds that is twice as efficient as code. They'll give him $2,000 tax write-off on that house, which more than pays for all the things he has to do in that house, and he can either keep that money or he can pass those savings on to the homeowner. But when you get these Energy Star homes and these efficient homes, they should have a higher market value. Because when we start looking at the total cost of ownership, if you're paying, say, a mortgage payment of $2,000 and you got an energy bill of $400, So if you can cut your energy bill down to $75 and pay $2,020 for mortgage payment, you're still $2,030 say, you're still $100 ahead a month. And that's what we're trying to get that philosophy into not only the residential sector with energy efficient mortgages, but into the commercial sector to make these real estate developers like Peter Fox understand that if you build an efficient building out here, you can charge a little bit more per square foot of rent for that thing, and your client's going to have much lower utility bills, and their total cost of ownership or utilization of that building will be less. So they're moving forward too. It's a win-win. It's just got to change the philosophy a little bit, because the philosophy is right now, I'm going to build it the cheapest way possible and charge the most rent I can for it. So the idea is to make inculcate some sense into the system. And so my feeling right now is we have to have regulations, and regulations mean building codes, and to force them. And the problem is right now, everybody, a building code is a minimum, and everybody treats it as a maximum. And we got to get people to go beyond code, beyond code, beyond code, beyond code. And as the codes ramp up, they'll take us where we need to go. It's a struggle. Yes, sir.
Your projections out to the year 2030 talked about net zero buildings.
Yeah.
Talk a little more about the vision of a net zero building.
Okay, a net zero building, and ASHRAE is trying to figure out, okay, we promised we're going to deliver this, now what do we do? And it comes twofold. One is that you make the building so much more efficient that its energy requirements are down around 30% of what it would have been before. Okay? And then you tack on some renewable energy systems. So you do solar hot water, and you do photovoltaic panels on the roof. And then you generate more energy than you need with those panels, and you put it out on the grid, and so you power your neighbor's buildings or whatever during the daytime. Then at nighttime, you suck energy back off the grid, and over an annual cycle, you are net zero. If your meter could run backwards, it would go forward and backwards and end up at zero.
How would you make this room net zero? What would be the sweeping changes?
I'd have to see what kind of windows you got in here. Well, yeah, if you got incandescent, yeah, I'd certainly change all of that. Oh, yeah, we'd change all the lighting. We actually looked at this building. What did we get? 40%? Yeah, we did them a report for this building, 40% energy savings. And a lot of it came from putting in the HVAC system, VAV conversion, and stuff like that. And stop ventilating 24 hours a day, 100% outside air, and things like that. But in the lighting, all the lighting we switched. But then you put those PV on the roof and hopefully generate enough. Yeah. And you can also do some things with, if you want to use biofuels and things like that in your boiler or whatever. There's other techniques. The question is, we can normally do a building that sits in an environment like this. It's pretty easy. How do we get the one down in downtown Chicago to be net zero? That's a trickier proposition.